Hello, and welcome to the Parenting Issues Show, where we tackle the most pressing topics to help you raise confident, resilient kids. I'm Nicole Brody, and today we're really diving into something every parent has encountered, helping our kids face their fears. Joining us is an incredible expert, Stephanie Shirkins. I hope I pronounced that right.
Yes.
Licensed associate counselor, child and teen anxiety specialist. Stephanie, welcome to the show. We're so excited to learn from you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So I really want to start with the basics here. Uh, why do kids experience anxiety, and how does fear really, let's say, manifest differently for children compared to us adults?
Yeah, children experience anxiety for a lot of different reasons. I would say that anxiety is a natural emotion that we all experience. When it turns more into like a clinical disorder, we're looking at like a persistent pattern of anxiety that keeps a kid from doing the things that they want to do. Typically, if a kid develops anxiety, we see some anxiety in the family with another family member, or maybe they have one of those more timid temperaments that predisposes them to get more distress when their anxiety comes up compared to other kids. And then fear is interesting because fear is a natural response to a dangerous situation, but anxiety takes that response and makes us fear things that are actually not dangerous, but makes us feel like they're dangerous. So it's an interesting distinction there.
Okay, there was a few things you mentioned about if there's someone in the family. Is that hereditary or environmental?
So it's a little bit of both. We don't know exactly for sure. There's not a gene for anxiety, but if a child has a parent with anxiety, research says that they're 6 to 7 times more likely to develop anxiety themselves. That could be
Wow.
because they're learning anxious patterns from a parent, and it also could be just they're more predisposed to that disorder as well.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's almost like if you as a parent, like if someone's listening, are suffering, perhaps, getting to the core of your anxiety will really help your child instead, like putting on the when you're in an airplane, kind of putting on the oxygen first for yourself, kind of thing. So interesting. So are you also saying that anxiety is kind of like a muscle that gets stronger the more that it's used? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, yes, anxiety gets stronger the more we listen to it. So, anxiety wants us to avoid what makes us anxious. So, the more we avoid what makes us anxious, the bigger anxiety gets. The more we can say, oh, that's my anxiety, I'm still going to do these things anyway, the smaller anxiety is going to get. So, it's really the avoidance that is going to maintain that anxiety or make it stronger.
Okay, so if you don't have the tools to work with that, most likely it will keep on getting bigger. And I think we're going to delve into this a little bit later. But is there anything, just curious, that relates to neuroplasticity here because of how the brain is wired when it's going into this anxious response? Is there anything like that?
Yeah, it's a really great point you bring up because what I like to explain to kids or parents is we're retraining the child's brain and the amygdala to be less reactive. So it is neuroplasticity. If the child learns that whenever they're anxious, they can't handle whatever they're anxious about, they learn that that thing is too scary for them to handle. If they learn that, yeah, that's uncomfortable for me, but I believe I can handle it, then their brain is wired to believe they can handle feeling anxious. So definitely neuroplasticity is involved when we're treating anxiety in a kid or in a family. We want to rewire their brain to believe that they can handle that feeling, not try to run away from that feeling.
Interesting. Wow, there's so many questions. It's such an interesting topic. I have like specific questions I want to ask you, but before I get into that, just quickly, because I think it's interesting for the audience, if it's not dealt with as a child, is that likely then to stay with the person into adulthood?
Yeah. So one thing I want to say too, to go back to saying if a parent has anxiety, a kiddo is 6 to 7 times more likely. If we intervene and we give parents skills, that does not have to be the case. So I want to give parents some hope with that.
Mhm.
And anxiety can be one of those things that, yes, stays with a person through adulthood, especially if they avoid a lot of the things they're anxious about. So if they, let's say a kiddo is really scared of going to certain places and the parents never take them to that place, so they avoid it and they don't get the skills to handle it. that will likely not resolve itself without some sort of intervention to give the kids skills to handle those uncomfortable things. So, yes, the earlier we can intervene, even prevention wise, getting kids those skills to manage anxious feelings, the better off they're going to be into adulthood.
Interesting. And you're almost saying so to face their fears. And sometimes we think we're protecting our kids by not going there because they're scared. And we're saying, okay, don't worry, we're trying to give them space. But actually, perhaps we need to do that to help them face it and not have that, anxious and okay, I don't need to deal with it. So I'm protected kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. To build distress tolerance, we have to experience distress, which is really hard as a parent to see. But if a kiddo can handle their distress at age 6, age 7, age 8, they'll be able to handle it when they're a teenager. If they don't experience distress until they're 17, 18, 19, 20, it'll be much more difficult for them to manage that experience.
So interesting. These are really amazing points that I think are so valuable and helpful for parents. One more question. At what age do you see, like from what age do you see in children, like as early as what age is probably a better way of saying it? Do you see the anxiety?
Do I see it like in children or seeing kids to treat them?
No, like seeing it present, like being able to distinct say this child has anxiety, because for me, a child that is very small, like I'm not used to that kind of thing. So I'm just
Mhm.
wondering, it's interesting to know at what age can it be present in a child, from what age?
That's a great question. I wouldn't say there's a definite age because when you have toddlers, and preschoolers, they're definitely more rigid. They're going to be wanting to be more attached to mom and dad. They're going to be less likely to jump into situations. So I would say, once they're kind of school age or maybe preschool age, you might see some of those patterns that seem less than normative, where it's like they're really, really having a hard time doing things, or they're asking a lot of reassuring questions, or they're expressing their worries a lot. And then I know you didn't ask this directly, but in terms of treating kids, I really like to treat the parents. I think, especially with younger kids or even up to middle school age, parents can learn a lot of things that can help their kids. Their kids don't necessarily directly need to be in therapy to help this thing. The parents can do a lot that can help
Oh,
them.
amazing. That's, I guess it's quite reassuring, right, for parents listening to be in control, to have a bit of control there. So, what are some actionable steps, speaking of that, that parents can take to help their kids face fears in a healthy way?
Yeah. So I would say if you know that there's something that your kid has a fear about, like let's say they're really anxious about swimming lessons or they're anxious about riding their bike, my number one tip would be to not provide the kid a lot of reassurance, but to empathize with their anxiety. Like, I know this is really hard for you, but express your confidence in their ability to handle it. So for swimming lessons, gosh, I know you're really worried about swimming lessons, but I know you're going to be able to handle it, rather than convincing them that they shouldn't be anxious or convincing them to not feel that way. We want to say, I see that you're anxious, but I know you can handle it. And then keep exposing them to the thing that they're anxious about. We don't have to force them, but you're still going to take them to the swimming lessons. And maybe they go in or don't go in the first time, but you're going to continue to provide that opportunity for them rather than saying, this is too hard for you, so we're not going to do it at all.
I love that. And I think that's really empowering for them. And, what about validating their emotions? How can parents really do that without feeding into the fear? Because it's like a balance, right?
Yes.
It's hard to say, I understand you, everything's going to be okay. Like, it's confusing, really, to
Yes.
know what to say.
Yeah, so definitely, I always encourage parents to talk less than they think that they should. And you
Mm.
can validate the emotion without validating the worry. So you can say, I can tell you're worried and I know that's so hard, rather than getting caught in swimming lesson facts. Like, most people don't drown in swimming lessons and swimming lessons are safe. And that's kind of validating the worry and giving the worry more power. But you can
Interesting.
validate their emotion saying, I can see that you're worried. I know that's hard for you and I know you can handle it, which is a little bit different.
Okay, almost like I see, I know you can do it. Like,
Yep,
you know what I mean? Because
absolutely.
it's hard to remember. So no matter what it is, I guess you can always think of that. I see, I know, handle. No,
Absolutely, yeah.
right.
And
As a
one other way,
mom myself,
yeah,
I just need to remember it. So see, no, handle, because my kids have all these crazy things as well, which is related, I guess, to anxiety. So, and I forget personally, right? Um, what am I supposed to say? Like, you're okay, you can do it, but see no handle. So maybe for someone listening, it can be a little prompt, let's call it.
Absolutely. Another way to think about it is express your support and express your confidence. So support what they're feeling and express your confidence in their abilities. And that's a beautiful, simple way to remember it. And you don't have to do it perfectly, but that's a good thing to remember some of the time.
Wonderful. I hope everyone listening has a pen. I will be watching this and writing down my notes after. So before we move on, I want to share a resource that's been a total game changer for my family, the Levelty app. If you've ever struggled to get your kids on board with chores or routines, this app is your secret weapon. Levelty turns parenting into a shared adventure. It's a chore tracker that rewards kids for their accomplishments, so they feel proud of the responsibilities. But what I love most is how it brings fun into the equation. It's not just about checking off tasks, it's about creating meaningful moments together as a family. Trust me, it's a lifesaver for building responsibility and, of course, connection. I use it every day and I can't recommend it enough. Check out Levelty. You'll thank me later. Let's talk about the triumph part of this equation. How does overcoming anxiety really impact a child's long-term development?
Yeah. I always like to think of it as we want to teach kids that they can handle anxiety and anxiety won't hold them back from doing things that they want to do. And so that provides a child with confidence in their abilities, belief that they can handle challenges that arise, and a sense that even if things are difficult, they'll be able to work through it. So we're never trying to get rid of the anxiety. We're always just saying, this will be a part of you. It's a part of all of us. Sometimes it's bigger or smaller, but it's not going to get in the way of what you want to do. And I think that really helps kids feel like they can step into situations that are a little bit unknown and uncertain, feeling like they'll be able to handle whatever they face.
Oh, I love that. That's a super powerful shift, I guess. Again, in validation of their emotions and I guess creating that safe environment for them to have that, but not letting it control everything they do. Are there any specific activities or habits parents can incorporate to encourage this mindset?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of creative things. If you have a kid who's struggling, you can do some sort of games with them to get them to do some exposure. So if we've got a kiddo who has a hard time going into certain rooms of the house, we can like hide little objects in that room and they can try to go there by themselves and find it and kind of develop their ability to do that. If a kiddo has a certain thing that they're afraid of doing, we can come up with a way to make it fun so that they can kind of gradually expose themselves to those things. And then if you have a kiddo who's generally doing pretty well, not struggling with anxiety, just see different ways you can allow them to be more independent. Can they go into the grocery store and get something by themselves? Can they check the mail? Can they take the dog on the walk? What are some opportunities for them to really feel like they can do things on their own at younger ages to develop that sense of like autonomy and confidence?
Interesting. I have a question. I think it comes from something personal, but I assume other parents will be able to understand, and maybe this will be helpful. So, what about if you have a child that, for example, today we had a bit of a breakthrough, but for example, a child that is scared to go to sleep by themselves or go to the toilet, but for example, today my son wanted to go to the park by himself without me, and there's such I don't, you can't go
Yeah.
to the toilet by yourself, but you can go to the park. So,
Yep.
and that's like a huge difference. You know, you would think that going to the park is much more fear mongering than going to sleep by yourself or going to the toilet. And I've spoken to a lot of parents actually who've said the same thing about this toilet and bedtime. So I assume this is a topic that a lot of parents listening might relate to. And what are some things there that parents can do to help that?
Yeah, so actually what you're describing is really common because going to the park is fun, right? Going to
Yeah.
bed and going to the bathroom are not as fun. And so oftentimes patterns within the house are so different than patterns outside the house, and patterns with parents are different than at school. So it's actually very common. One thing I like to encourage parents to do in these situations is decide what they are willing to do or not willing to do, and then just communicate that to their child. with empathy. So let's say for a while you're like, I will lay in bed with you for 10 minutes and then I'm going to go. And you're not telling your child what to do, but you're telling them that this is what you're going to do. And you could say, and I know that might be hard for you at first because it's a change, and I know you're going to be able to handle it. And then over time, you kind of change the amount of time that you lay with them. If I was working with a parent, we would get more specific about this plan.
Mhm.
But truly, it's just communicating to the kid what you're going to do. What is your part going to be? Are you going to continue to go to the bathroom with them? Are you only going to do it sometimes or for a certain amount of time? And just express that you know that they can handle that discomfort that's going to come up from it. And you know it will be hard, but you know that they're going to be able to handle it. That will come with some upset feelings at first because it's going to
Mhm.
be a change. But as
Mhm.
they go through that process, they will learn that they can actually handle those experiences by themselves.
Yeah, amazing. So for example, let's talk about the bedtime routine, maybe making it longer so so they feel like they've achieved something, and you can
Mhm.
kind of say later, even though it's probably the same amount of time. For example, say I will sit with you for half an hour,
Mhm.
and then I'm gonna go, and I know that will be hard. And then would it be good to reassure them the next day and say like, "Wow, you're so amazing. I said I was going to leave and you slept all by yourself. What, what a big boy." Is that something, a reassurance that you should do afterwards to, and then slowly close the gap? You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah, I think anytime you notice a kid tolerating their discomfort and doing something new, you wanna say, "Wow, that was really hard for you, and you did it." And you wanna point that out to them, that you see them doing hard things and you could see them handling it. And yeah, absolutely. So if you stay with them for 30 minutes and you make that time shorter, there's also the reverse where you stay with them and you kinda come back and check on them every, like, 5 minutes or so, and eventually they kind of fall asleep during that time. So there's a lot of creative ways to do it. But yes, of course, if you notice them overcoming something, you want to point that out because that's not easy to do. It's hard to fall asleep on your own, and you want to acknowledge that they've really made that effort.
We're coming towards the end, but before we do, I would love to ask if you have anything else you want to share, or anything specific if we didn't touch upon it, or if not, that's totally okay. Is there anything else you would like to share with the audience?
I think in general, I would love every parent to know that it's normal to worry as a parent and it's normal for your kid to worry. It's not a sign that there's something wrong. And how we talk about worries and make them more normal and we don't react to them like emergencies, that kind of makes this thing not as big of a deal. And that's what we want to do in general. It's when we start to elevate the worries to an emergency that we kind of make things more intense and more difficult to manage. So if you're a parent who has some worries, totally normal. If you have a kiddo who has some worries, it's totally normal. And there's a lot of things that you can do as a family to work through those things to make things better.
Wonderful. That's really reassuring. And also, I guess, for them to know you're not alone. Every parent is going through the same thing at just different levels and different times, I get. So, thank you so much for joining us today, Stephanie. For our listeners, if you'd like to learn more, we'll include resources and links in the show notes. And don't forget to check out the Levelty app for turning everyday parents into a fun and rewarding experience.